mast cells, and it's M-A-S-T as in Tom, mast cells, they are immune cells, and they're very important immune cells in our body. They're in almost every single tissue. There's very few tissue that the mast cells are not in. So they're not in the retina. But we have mast cells in the skin, very high numbers in the skin. Mast cells are in anywhere where your body meets the outside world. That's how you can think about it. The lining of the eyes, the sinuses, the nose, the entire GI tract from the mouth all the way down to the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines. They're in the lungs, they're in the trachea, they're in all the lining of the blood vessels. They're in our spleen. I mean, they're made in the bone marrow. You have some in muscles. They're at every nerve ending. So what that tells us is they're very instrumental to our survival. And these mast cells are quite complex. They're some of the most complex cells in the body. They were first described in 1878. And every year there's still new things being discovered about these cells. That's how complex they are. These cells have hundreds of what are called receptors on the outside. And those receptors are sensing what's outside of them. So I think of them like the first sensing, defending, kind of like our first responder cells in our bodies. Then they have in them hundreds of different chemicals called mediators. And there are estimates that there's over 1,000 different ones. So that makes them very well suited to respond to a whole variety of things. So they're going to respond to every molecule of air you breathe, every molecule of food you eat. They're also, remember, they're in the brain and the nervous system. They're responding to stress. They're responding to injury. They have roles in pregnancy. They regulate sleep-wake cycles. They have so many critical roles in their body. One of the primary roles is protecting us from toxins and pathogens, and then initiating the healing response when we're injured. So if you think about, most people can relate to, if you've cut yourself, you don't get it cleaned out quickly enough. Let's say you're working outside and it's really dirty, and then that cut gets red and swollen. That's the mast cells initiating a response and calling the other immune cells in. So they're a big immune cell or immune system communicator as well. One of the mediators, and the most well-known, is histamine in the mast cells. There's two other cells that make histamine as well. One's called basophils and one's called eosinophils. The mast cells are the bigger player here for most people. Then they also, another type of mediators become a household word now, are cytokines. They make cytokines, and cytokines are just messaging molecules. So we talk about a cytokine storm. The mast cells are part of that response, that over response. But in normal people, mast cells should be responding to what's happening. So you eat something you probably shouldn't have eaten. It's a little old. They might make you throw up, so you get that out of your body, and then things should calm back down. Or if you get something on your skin that shouldn't be on your skin, that's not good for you, they're going to start responding and helping clean that up and get it off your skin. If you get a splinter embedded, they're going to produce the inflammation to push that splinter out. What's happened, though, is because the mast cells are there to respond to anything going on in our environment. If we think about how we were, I don't know, let's go with 500 years ago. We lived in a completely different culture than we live in now, absolutely unrecognizable. So you would get your work done, you would have periods of rest. We didn't have chemicals, we didn't have factories, we didn't have any of these things. We did have mold. And that's important to know. We did have mold, but we didn't have electromagnetic fields. We didn't have Wi-Fi. We didn't have any of this stuff. And there were genetic mast cell disorders, but this mast cell activation syndrome was not a big deal. What's happened is we are exposed to so many things now on a daily basis that trigger mast cells. So you think about just the level of stress that we have, financial, political, familial stress, if you think about all the divisions this past 2 years and all the stuff that's going on for us, just on that stressor side, that the amount of toxins just in our food and our water supply, the plastics, the fragrances and candles that are hormone disruptors and those plugins, all of these things our mast cells have to constantly respond to. So what's happened is, I think of them like the guards of your castle gate to keep you protected and safe. And they should be able to know the difference between, oh, here's the baker bringing bread in, and that's safe, so we're going to let them in. Oh, that's an enemy, we're going to keep them out. We're going to launch an attack. If you were a guard at a castle gate and you had to be on guard 24/7 and you never got a break, and there's constantly things coming at you, you know, from ever having sleep deprivation, you get wonky. Mast cells get wonky, and they start over responding and they get oversensitive. So they're going to respond to things they wouldn't normally respond to. Not everybody, when they feed corn to chickens, breaks out in hives. But I had already had so much toxin load, both in utero, just generational. The food, we didn't have a clean diet growing up. We ate lots of processed food where I was growing up. And then I was living in this house full of toxic mold. So my mast cells were already getting dysregulated. What you're looking for in terms of whether you have this or not is, do you have symptoms in 2 or more systems, first of all? That's one of the criteria. So if somebody's only symptom is itching and hives, and they only have skin symptoms, and truly nothing else, there's no GI issue, perfect GI tract, there's no brain fog, there's no sleep issues, there's no breathing issues, nothing, then that would not be a mast cell activation issue. You might have issues only with the mast cells in skin, but it wouldn't be called mast cell activation syndrome. So that would be your classic, simply chronic urticaria. But chronic urticaria is a symptom of mast cell activation syndrome. And what makes it so hard is that people can show up in all kinds of different ways. So you could be like me, where I literally had symptoms in every system. Or I have some people who, they just have brain fog, they're not sleeping well, and their guts are a mess, and maybe they have trouble with itching, or they have flushing. Ruddy cheeks are common, and flushing can happen with histamine intolerance or mast cell activation. One of the telltale signs and differences with mast cell activation, histamine intolerance, is having symptoms right after eating or while eating within about 30 minutes. And not everybody gets that has mast cell issues. But if they have that, that's generally the mast cells responding. And this is where it starts to drive people crazy, trying to figure out what they're reacting to. And it may not be a particular food. It may just be the act of eating that's triggering them. You have, on the other hand, histamine intolerance is only when somebody has issue with histamine. So they may have itching, they may have GI issues. Histamine, too much histamine can cause things like acid reflux, heartburn, loose stools. You might have anxiety, you might have some sleep problems, but it's not going to be as severe, and it's not going to be as complex. One of the main ways to distinguish is to lower histamine foods for about 6 weeks, see if it makes a difference, and then try to support some of the pathways. So you can take like a DAO supplement, diamine oxidase, that breaks down histamine. You can take things that help the methylation pathway that help with histamine. If you have mast cell activation, a lot of times people don't tolerate those methylation supplements, first of all. They generally have more sensitivities, not always, but they may have sensitivity supplements to foods, to stress, maybe hard to weather stress. They may have sensitivity to heat and cold or vibration. You're getting into more of a sensitivity situation there. But really the only way to tell is to first try to work on the histamine side and then see what you have left. But I did because there's so many symptoms that have been correlated with this in the research, I did take the research on the symptoms and made a symptom survey people can get on our website if they want to check it out. It's all free. And you just add up your total of symptoms, the more you have, the more likely you're dealing with mast cell activation.